William Blake. Mystic poet, visionary artist, and literary revolutionary.
William Blake, 1757–1827, stands as one of the most enigmatic and profoundly original figures in English literature. Both a poet and painter, he lived in near obscurity during his lifetime, producing a body of work that fused prophetic vision, revolutionary zeal, and a spiritual cosmos of his own making. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Blake resisted the lure of material success and remained steadfastly devoted to his artistic ideals. His works, often misunderstood during his life, have since been recognized as visionary masterpieces, placing him firmly within the Romantic tradition while also transcending it. Blake's poetry is marked by intense symbolism, personal mythology, and spiritual themes, addressing the dualities of innocence and experience, freedom and oppression, heaven and hell. As literary critic Harold Bloom notes in The Visionary Company, a reading of English Romantic poetry, Blake is a religious poet whose religion is not Christianity, but the religion of the imagination. This unique stance, along with his prophetic voice and aesthetic innovation, positions William Blake as a revolutionary force in literature and art. William Blake was born in London on November 28, 1757, to a working-class family. His father was a hosier, and his mother a devout Christian who deeply influenced his spiritual outlook. From a young age, Blake claimed to see visions, angels in trees, the faces of prophets in the clouds, experiences that would shape his entire worldview and poetic mission. At the age of 10, he was enrolled in a drawing school, and by 14, he was apprenticed to the engraver James Bazier. His training in visual art became foundational to his later work, as he produced illuminated books combining poetry and images. Blake's early religious exposure and spiritual experiences convinced him that imagination, not reason, was the path to divine truth. He lived during a time of rapid industrial and political change, including the American and French revolutions. These events stirred Blake's radicalism, forming the backdrop for much of his poetic prophecy. According to Peter Ackroyd in Blake, 1995, Blake was formed in a crucible of London's energy, half mystic, half political rebel. Blake's philosophy was grounded in the supremacy of the imagination over reason. He rejected the Enlightenment's focus on rationalism, seeing it as a barrier to spiritual insight. He believed that true knowledge comes from inner vision, or what he called the poetic genius. As he famously wrote in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, "Without contraries is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence." Northrop Frye, in Fearful Symmetry, a study of William Blake, 1947, explains, "Blake is not merely a poet with a myth, but a poet who is his own myth. His personal mythology, Urizen, reason, loss, imagination, orc, revolution, and others, gave his poems a symbolic universe resembling biblical epics." Blake also opposed institutional religion, believing it chained the soul. In his poem, The Garden of Love, the speaker finds that a chapel has replaced the natural space of love and freedom, and the gates of this chapel were shut, and thou shalt not writ over the door. One of Blake's most accessible and beloved works, Songs of Innocence and of Experience, 1794, captures his vision of human duality. The subtitle reads, "Showing the two contrary states of the human soul," reflecting his central theme of opposites. In The Lamb from Innocence, the speaker celebrates childlike faith. "Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee?" The poem's innocence is sharply contrasted by the Tyger from experience. Tyger, Tyger, burning bright in the forests of the night. Critic G.E. Bentley, in The Stranger from Paradise, a biography of William Blake, 2001, argues that Songs of Innocence and of Experience is Blake's most powerful poetic synthesis, stating, "It is there that the mystery of good and evil, love and repression takes on its fullest poetic form." Other important poems, like The Chimney Sweeper, expose the brutal exploitation of children, while London criticizes urban decay and moral corruption. The poems denounce the church, monarchy and society's hypocrisies in prophetic and lyrical language. Written between 1790 and 1793, this work is a hybrid of satire, biblical parody, and metaphysical philosophy. It reverses traditional moral structures, proposing that what is called evil, desire, energy, is actually essential to life. "Energy is eternal delight," Blake declares. The text's Proverbs of Hell provide striking aphorisms. "The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom." Harold Bloom, in Blake's Apocalypse, 1963, calls this work the manifesto of Blake's metaphysical rebellion and suggests it breaks away from all conventional religious systems, presenting an alternative moral cosmos. Blake's most ambitious works include America, A Prophecy, The Book of Urizen, Milton, and Jerusalem. These are difficult and symbolic, interweaving his invented mythology with themes of revolution, fall, and redemption. America, A Prophecy, 1793, celebrates the American Revolution, personifying it through Orc, the spirit of rebellion. The Book of Urizen, 1794, portrays the fall of Urizen, the embodiment of reason and law, whose tyranny leads to a divided and suffering world. Milton and Jerusalem explore Blake's visions of redemption through self-annihilation and spiritual awakening. Fry notes, "These are not poems of the past, but of an apocalypse always imminent." While difficult to interpret, these works reflect Blake's mythic ambition to create a spiritual history of humanity. Blake's fusion of word and image was revolutionary. He created illuminated books by etching texts and illustrations on copper plates and hand-coloring them. This form allowed him full control over his vision, combining poetry, prophecy, and visual symbolism. Critic David Bindman, in William Blake, The Complete Illuminated Books, 2000, writes, "Blake invented a new way of seeing, through a fusion of poetic thought and pictorial language. Angels, flames, stars, monstrous creatures, all populate his pages, turning his books into sacred objects of art." Blake was a radical in thought and spirit. He championed liberty, equality, and the imaginative soul against the tyrannies of church and state. He supported the American and initially the French revolutions, but later grew disillusioned with the latter's violence. In London, he writes, "The mind-forged manacles I hear." This haunting line summarizes Blake's view that society and its institutions imprison human freedom and imagination. He was deeply affected by child labor, poverty, and war. In The Chimney Sweeper, Blake criticizes the moral blindness of those who justify exploitation in the name of religion and order. according to E.P. Thompson in Witness Against the Beast, William Blake and the Moral Law, 1993, Blake's poetry is not a flight from the world, but a prophetic attack on it. While often grouped with romantic poets like Wordsworth and Coleridge, Blake was an outlier. Unlike them, he was not inspired by nature in the conventional sense, but by inner vision. While Wordsworth found divinity in the natural world, Blake saw it in the human soul. M.H. Abrams, in The Mirror and the Lamp, 1953, says, Blake's Romanticism is not about nature or sentiment, but about the visionary consciousness that can remake the world. Blake emphasized the artist as a prophet, whose task was to challenge and transform the world through imagination. In this, he was both a romantic and a precursor to modern existential and surrealist thought. Blake died in 1827, largely unrecognized. But in the 19th century, poets like Dante Gabriel Rossetti and Algernon Swinburne began to rediscover his genius. By the 20th century, he was hailed as a major poet and artist. W.B. Yeats was deeply influenced by Blake and edited his works. Allen Ginsberg, the Beat poet, claimed to have heard Blake's voice and wrote songs of innocence and experience inspired by him. Today, Blake's influence extends to music, visual arts, psychology — Carl Jung admired his archetypes — and political thought. Critic Kathleen Raine, in Blake and Tradition, 1968, observes, Blake is not a poet of the past. He belongs to every age that seeks to break its chains and seek the divine within. William Blake remains one of the most radical and visionary figures in English literature. His poetry, infused with mysticism, political fervor, and spiritual insight, defied the conventions of his time and still speaks powerfully to ours. His belief in imagination as the path to divine truth, his fierce critique of tyranny in all forms, and his sublime integration of text and image mark him as a genius far ahead of his time. In the words of T.S. Eliot, quoted in Selected Essays, 1932, Blake's poetry has the unpleasantness of great poetry. It challenges, provokes, and awakens the spirit. Blake's legacy endures not only in literature, but in every act of visionary rebellion.